Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Cubes of Tzeentch Part 2. We're going to be doing something a little different today, and we are starting with sketching out our ideas. I honestly did not know how to build these guys, and I thought starting with pencil and paper would be the best bet. Now, some of these renditions you'll notice do come to life, but some of them don't make the cut, and also some of them just kind of get made during the building process, which is the greatest part about making any sort of model or kit bash. Now, of course, if you are new here, the cubes of Tzeentch are made of styrofoam, and that's what we're doing today. We're using this pile of styrofoam I got from a shelf I recently built to make the base foundations for our models. If you haven't seen part 1, I suggest stopping here and clicking to part 2 later. I also forgot to mention the units that we are making today are 2 Lords of Change and a unit of Flamers. It's not going to be a lot of models, but it's going to be a decent amount that I feel like I could bring something a little bit new to the Cubes of Tzeentch idea. Now, the second Lord of Change I'm building right here was not an original idea. In fact, it came from a commenter on my last Cubes of Tzeentch video. It was by Richard Harrison. He said, "I would love to see a greater demon done in this style, a constantly shifting cube made from smaller cubes." And just this comment alone, I thought, oh yeah, it has to be done. So there you go, Richard. Hopefully this cube of Tzeentch greater demon lives up to the hype. I definitely enjoyed this one, and I wanted to get really complex with it, but also at the same time I knew when we added spray paint to these guys, it could change dramatically. So this was a bit of an experiment, but also an attempt. Alright, let's get these guys spray painted up. As you can see, there's 3 of them, but only 2 of them made the cut, and that's totally okay. I only really needed 2. Now, the reason why I want you to go check out part 1 if you haven't seen already is because I go into depth of what happens when you put spray paint on styrofoam and using a variety of different paints. And I go into where I got the inspiration for this project in the first place, so please go see that first one. And while I got you here, I might as well guilt trip you, but 91% of you who watched the first one are not subscribed. If you liked the first one, you should subscribe, especially if you're watching the second one. I have a bunch of other projects on the way that I think you're going to enjoy. So here are the results for the Lords of Change. This first one came out perfectly. It wasn't too warped or too melted to the point where you couldn't see what I was going for, and it still has that kind of cubic shifting feel to the whole sculpt. The second one, on the other hand, kept its shape, but a bit too much. I was looking for something a little more gruesome, so while I was working on the first one, I decided to spray down the second one aggressively and let that kind of dry in the background. You guys will see it later. Eyes. As you guys know, I love these rhinestone jewel beaded eye things, and I bought some big boys right here. I got so excited when these came in the mail because they are going to bring these things to life. Of course, we got to prep this thing for its eyeball, so I cut out the circumference of each eye into the model so that way it could fit snugly later. After getting a variety of small eyes into the model and ready, I grabbed some PVA and water, mixed together 1-to-1, and started applying it to the styrofoam model. This in the end will be soaked up by the styrofoam and give it a hefty amount of protection from future damage. In part 1, I got my bases wrong for my infantry horror models, which were 25mm bases, and I fitted them with 32mm. This time around, I am not doing the same thing. I triple checked, and yes, flamers do run on 32mm bases. I used a Space Marine just to compare sizes and started chopping away at some styrofoam. But to my surprise, I wasn't really feeling it on the original design I made. So I did what my artistic self wanted to do. I just wanted to start chopping things, and I came up with this strange shape, kind of like rectangles with styrofoam heads on top, like these little tinier squares, because I felt like the original design just kind of looked too much like a smaller version of our Lord of Change, and I wanted to have variety in this army. After comparing our Space Marine to the new Flamer design, I was pretty happy with it, so I went forward, chopping up a variety of heads to make these strange rectangular flamers. Now the results after they were spray painted were spectacular. I was kind of going for this, like, I don't know, like flamey ghost, almost like a sheet ghost, but something that was coming from out underneath the rectangle, kind of spewing outwards, kind of helping these guys float and like hover. To create this effect, I sprayed from the bottom up, and then that hollowed out the inside of the styrofoam, kind of giving it almost this drapey, cloth looking, burning look. I don't know, I really liked it. Also, here's that Lord of Change I was talking about. It looks freaking gruesome, and this is exactly the feel I was going for the second Lord of Change. Just this melted, weird, goopy, bubbly mass that is just riveted with holes. It's kind of creepy and trypophobia, but also, I don't know, feels very trippy at the same time. So here are some 3D printed teeth from the last project we did. I just blew them up to bigger sizes, and they are going to look freaking stellar on this model. I just kind of put them in place to kind of gauge where I was wanting to lay them out, and then start tearing out foam from the inside. And while Rick is ripping out styrofoam and applying those teeth with some PVA, let me tell you about today's sponsor. That's right, I'm just kidding. It's our Patreon. If you guys want to join me over on Patreon, you get behind the scenes look at some of the future projects, as well as you can subscribe to as low as $3 or join our $5 tier and get into our Discord, which is being set up in the works right now because I've been sick and things have been really busy. But yes, go check that out. All right, back to the build. Thank you so much. While that PVA glue was drying, I cut out some eye holes for the smaller flamers and then got to priming things. If you want to do this project, you obviously need an airbrush, because if you use a rattle can to prime and prep these things, you're going to end up melting the styrofoam all over again. And if you don't own an airbrush already and you're going to be in this hobby for a long time, I suggest just doing it. It's going to save you a lot of headaches and money and times having to figure out when the weather's going to be good for your rattle can priming. It's just a simple, sweet choice. Now for this Lord of Change, if you don't remember, it has tentacles coming out of its toothy maw. So I'm going to grab some green stuff and mix that together to get it ready to make some tentacles. Now there are a couple of things I did along the way as an experiment, and a couple of things I backpedaled on in the end. One of the main things I backpedaled on was using this soft wire as kind of an armature for the tentacles. The green stuff wouldn't really adhere to the wire and or kind of keep center, so a lot of the time wire was sticking out, and or since it wasn't adhering to it, it would, since it was halfway through curing, kind of bend and or twist in certain ways as it was, I don't know, hanging around in the air. It was unstable and it wasn't producing good results, and I only did about 4 tentacles and ditched the idea. What I forgot to film and what I did like and end up doing is this top left corner here. You'll see some sticks and some brushes with some green stuff wrapped around it. Basically, I made tiny little snake-like strands with the green stuff and then wrapped them around a couple of brushes, therefore letting it set overnight and then getting these really awesome spindly and medium-sized tentacles that look freaking awesome. I suggest doing this if you need something really complicated or spirally. Spirally? Spirally is not a word. Spindly? You get it. Anyways, let's ignore my terrible grammar and get to making this model a little more seamless. The 3D print smooth surface to the styrofoam just wasn't doing it for me. So I took some green stuff and added a few layers using my sculpting tool to kind of help put some texture in there. I am still not a master at green stuff, but I'm trying to get there, and hopefully this makes some sort of difference. I think it did. Now let's work on that base. I drilled into the middle of this base, which was covered in PVA and dirt. Then I added some EVA foam rocks with some super glue, along with some 3D printed occult bits, rocks with runes, skulls, and candles, which would tie into the theme of our last build. Here's the other base for the other Lord of Change. I used a lot of candles on this one and even added some cat litter to break up the monotony of those bigger rocks. Let's get back to painting some models. We're going to get onto those flamers and create a reverse zenithal this time. Instead of where we would usually put a highlight on top of the model, we're going to be working from the inside out, shooting some white ink into the bottom, creating a nice gradient going up, because I wanted these guys to look like there was flames coming out from the core of these models. Now, I will admit something. I am not proud of any of the glow effects I've done in this video. The candle effects, which you'll see later, and the glow effects for the flamers are completely off. Something about them just isn't right, and I was doing a rushed job, but we'll get to those details later. If anything, I hope you can learn from my mistakes and improve on your own glow effect. And in the meantime, I'm going to be doing some more studying in the background just to really up my technique. Now that all our models are zenithaled, I grabbed some Game Color Azul Ultramarine and applied that to the tops of the flamers and to the sides of the Lord of Change. I took a complete shot in the dark with this paint because I just haven't touched my Game Color paints in a long time. I've been really hooked on AK paints for a minute here, but this blue azul ultramarines color is just perfect. It's stone cold, but it's not too bright, but it's not too dark. It's the perfect mid-tone that I'm looking for, and when we apply the color shift on it, it is just chef's kiss. Going on with that glow effect, we're spraying with the yellow ink from underneath, followed by an orange, and then layered on the very top with the top red. And then I believe I went back through one more time with a white on the tips and applied one more yellow. It's a decent glow, but it could be better. Quickly moving on to the next step, we're using a lime green, neon green, and a turquoise blue ink for the Lord of Change. The steps that we're taking here was layered as such, neon green first, followed through with a dark green on the edges, and then blended together with that turquoise, and then going through once more with another white ink in the middle, and then bringing back that bright glow with the neon green. It's kind of like stacking the brightest to the darkest back to the brightest once again with the final step. I felt like this glow effect I was pretty satisfied with. With that same bright blue turquoise, we covered the top of the zenithal highlight on the tentacle Lord of Change as well. We lost the footage somewhere, but the underbelly of the tentacle Tzeentch was covered with a dark blue ink, followed through with a red ink. This created a vibrant purple color that I felt like complemented that turquoise. And then last but not least, we apply that shifter's paint all over the surface of the model to finish it up. Off camera, I figured out the circumference of where I wanted the eye. I then took my X-Acto knife and gently cut out a circle, being careful not to damage the sides of this little iris area because they would fall apart. It was a very thin amount of styrofoam. After placing the eyes in the second Lord of Change, I decided to get to dry brushing these bases. We're using a very simple technique that we used in our last video, which is just a dry brush from black to gray to white, building up. Some of you may have noticed in the last video I had tried to attempt to draw in runes with my bases, but this time around I skipped it because I felt like the runes didn't have enough impact last time, and I just felt like keeping things pretty simple with these ones. On top of that, we're going to try to add a glow effect that I think would have taken away from any smaller details such as that. Speaking of details, we used a bone white by Game Colors Vallejo and applied that to the candles and to any skulls and or bones on the bases. It's definitely a bone white I recommend when covering black. I only ever need 1 or 2 layers and it seems to get really good coverage. Alright, here's my attempting glow effect on the candles for this video. I apply a yellow ink followed by an orange to the tips of the candle glow. I then combine the orange and the yellow together to get a middle ground color and apply that to the middle, therefore kind of giving it a candy corn kind of look. This is all on purpose though, because we're going through with an orange ink over the top, followed through with a white ink, and then layered on a yellow ink and then orange once again. This in hopes to kind of combine all those colors and make that glow effect. Now, at a distance, this glow effect isn't too bad, but I know what I did wrong, and in the last video I actually took my time glazing, dry brushing, and layering, and just trying to really make stuff pop, whereas this one I was trying to take shortcuts and it kind of shows. At the end of the day, I learned I can either have some pretty mediocre glow effects if I want to take the shortcuts, or I can really take my time and make them pop if I really want to. I attempted doing a strange OSL effect on the bases for the flamers. This was just one that was out of pocket and didn't feel right, and it's one I'm going to revisit as well. I think it would be a brighter base in the end, but this was the effect we got. Anyways, enough talk. Let's get into those glam shots, shall we? And there is about 1,000 points of Tzeentch. It's pretty freaking awesome. We could play a little game if we wanted to. It won't be the most optimal thing, but hey, it would just be for fun. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and please like and subscribe and share with your friends. If you guys want to see more of this content and behind the scenes stuff, we now have a Patreon, and so you can subscribe there as well and help out the channel each step of the way. As always, thank you guys so much for supporting me in Boxnot, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.